In other news, it's been 600 days since Hamas's October 7th attacks on Israel. Today, Israelis have been marking this grim milestone. It comes as the government resumes its military offensive in Gaza, all while Israeli hostages remain in the enclave. This Wednesday, families of hostages and former hostages themselves have been speaking out, directing their anger squarely at Netanyahu.
This must end, and it can end now, because all of them, all of the hostages, the living and the dead, all are here, just one decision away. I call on the government of Israel and its head, the Prime Minister. President Trump opened the door. Idan Alexander walked through it to freedom. And that door must remain open until everyone, until the last of them walks through it.
Mr. Prime Minister, an entire nation looks to you and wonders, has your value system been disrupted?
Prime Minister, on October 7th, the basic contract between the state and its citizens were broken. You failed that day, and you have been failing for 600 days. You are failing in your refusal to do one thing that will bring them all back: declare an end to the war.
We can now bring in Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and former US Negotiator. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. In the past few weeks, we have seen clear divisions emerge in Israel, not just from the street, but from within the political establishment itself, whether it's using terminology like ethnic cleansing or statements like no sane country kills babies as a hobby. How is it that Benjamin Netanyahu continues to drown out the noise and effectively do what he wants? Is it because he knows that the end of the day, he has Washington's backing?
Look, the most simple answer to your question is that in the Israeli political system, all you need is 60+1 to govern. And Mr. Netanyahu presides over a very coherent, cohesive Israeli coalition, right-wing, messianic, and on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in the Jerusalem District Court, now 4 years in running. Mr. Netanyahu has one overriding objective, and that is to stay in power. So the domestic politics, there's a fair number of Israelis who clearly continue to support the prime minister. And while the Israelis have shown and did show in 2023 by mobilizing hundreds of thousands of people in the streets 40+ weeks in a row in order to oppose judicial reform or judicial overhaul, which would have rearranged the Israeli political system and undermined the power of the Israeli Supreme Court. Again, it's Knesset math, Israeli parliament math that pertains. And yes, you're quite correct. In 18 months, neither the international community, which has essentially stood by and watched an extraordinary loss of life, both on the Palestinian and on the Israeli side, the Arab states, including Israel's treaty partners, Egypt and Jordan, and the Abraham countries, have done nothing to impose costs or consequences on either Israel or the United States. And then, of course, the Biden administration has essentially evolved into or changed into the Trump administration. Neither Biden nor Trump has demonstrated any sense of putting the kind of pressure on Mr. Netanyahu or the Israeli government that could push him to consider changing his tactics. And frankly, that's where we are now, tragically, 600 days after October 7th.
But the Trump administration may not be putting pressure directly that we know of, but we have seen some sort of rifts emerge with Israel, haven't we? Because the US president was recently in the Middle East, but he gave Israel a skip. We know that the bonds between Israel and the United States are ironclad, or whatever strong terminology one wants to use. But we do know that the Trump administration has been eyeing a nuclear deal with Iran. This is something that Israel doesn't want to see happen. We have reports from CNN and others that Israel is drawing up plans to strike Iranian nuclear facilities if it deems whatever future deal Donald Trump does strike with Iran is not good enough. Would Netanyahu go out of his way to scuttle a deal and effectively put that rock-solid relationship with the United States in jeopardy?
Look, on the issue of Iran, the Trump administration has made it unmistakably clear that until it reaches the conclusion that diplomacy or a U.S.-Iranian deal to constrain or restrain Iran's nuclear program, until that is clearly shown to be beyond the reach of possibility, there's absolutely no way, in my judgment, that Mr. Netanyahu would unilaterally strike Iranian nuclear sites, he'd need a green light from Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is not interested, for any number of reasons, in sparking an Israeli-Iranian military confrontation that could draw the United States in and plunge the region into something we've never witnessed before, which is a genuine regional war. Look, the Trump administration, I worked in every administration from Jimmy Carter to Bush 43. The Trump administration has done things that no Republican and no Democratic president has ever done with respect to Israel. It's dealt directly with Hamas, negotiated a ceasefire with the Houthis, which left the Houthis free, presumably, to strike Israel with drones and ballistic missiles. And as you pointed out, it's begun, over Netanyahu's objections, a diplomatic effort with the Iranians. The question, though, is whether any of these headlines will result in the kind of trend line that would create what normal humans, including me and you, would regard as serious or sustained pressure on the Netanyahu government to change its policies with respect to the war in Gaza. Right now, I see no indication of that.
Well, we have seen a little trickle of aid that has entered, but I wanted to ask you, the fact that you mentioned it, we did see essentially Washington bypass Israel totally and secure the release of Idan Alexander. What does that signify to you? Is Trump tired of Netanyahu?
Frustration is growing. There's no question about it. And I think the release of Idan Alexander was also situational. The administration wanted to do something on the eve of the president's trip to the Gulf, where he was going to be hammered to some degree by Gulf states over his policies in Gaza. I think they wanted to show some signs of life with respect to an Israeli-Hamas hostage deal. And you could still see such a deal for a limited number of hostages in exchange for a ceasefire. But right now, I see no way that this administration is going to be able to resolve the problem that Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas's end games in Gaza are fundamentally different. And what the last 600 days of war, in the wake of October 7, the willful, indiscriminate killing of Israeli civilians, sexual predation, mutilation, the taking of hostages, and then Israel's massive, brutal response, which has resulted in an exponential rise in Palestinian deaths and injuries. 600 days on, what this shows to me is that in an existential conflict, or near existential for Mr. Netanyahu politically, the role of outside parties, whether it's France, the United States, the ICC, the ICJ, the Arab states, has been limited. It shows, frankly, a divided, self-interested, and feckless Arab world, international community, European policy, and clearly an unwillingness in Washington to use its extraordinary leverage to get results.
I want to talk about all of that in just a second, but we have news coming in that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has reportedly resumed operations, this after a brief halt earlier today due to insecurity. Yesterday, Israel's army had denied opening fire at desperate Palestinians trying to access aid in Gaza. Here's UNRWA's head talking about this very opaque organization. Take a listen.
The model of aid distribution proposed by Israel does not align with core humanitarian principle. It will deprive large part of Gaza, the highly vulnerable people, of desperately needed assistance. We have seen yesterday the shocking images of hungry people pushing against fences, desperate for food. It was chaotic, undignified and unsafe. I believe it is a waste of resources and a distraction from atrocities.
Aaron David Miller, let me bring you in once again. Your reaction to the haphazard rollout, which we've seen so far, of this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a very opaque private operator whose own head quit due to doubts over independence and impartiality.
You know, any aid in the Gaza is better than no aid, but I have to say, we're completely overcomplicating this. The only way to get Gaza what it needs, and pre-October 7, there were 600 trucks a day to meet Gazans' needs. The only way to do this is overland through trucks And frankly, we've come up with all kinds of ideas, airdrops. There was the notion of a U.S. peer. Now it's the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. None of this, frankly, is going to meet the requirements. The international community is perfectly capable, and the NGOs are determined, World Food Program and others, can in fact find a way, and there are problems. There are criminal gangs, there's Hamas diversion, and yes, there's a risk. There's no question about it. But there's also a risk of food insecurity, the prospects of famine, malnutrition, and frankly, here is where I think the government of Israel has made a major, major mistake, quite willfully, I might add, because it's using food, it's using assistance in order to pressure Hamas and put pressure on the local population to pressure Hamas to basically realize its war aims. And frankly, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I would argue, is not going to work. You need a ceasefire at a minimum. You need the involvement of reputable, credible NGOs that can distribute this assistance. And you need an Israeli agreement to facilitate this aid so that a long-suffering population can get the assistance that it drastically needs. So again, some aid is better than none, but the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is not going to answer the mail here. Only an Israeli government, an American administration, and the international community working on a rational basis to deliver aid, trying to end the war, of course, at least while the war is ongoing, to find a way to get Gazans the aid that they require, and it can be done.
During the course of this war, you mentioned we've seen Israel effectively open and close aid crossings as they deem fit. Over the past 11 weeks, we have seen a complete blockade on aid entering the Gaza Strip. You spoke about the meekness, the weakness of the Western world. What leverage does the West, I'm not talking about the United States. We know that the US has a lot of leverage over the state of Israel. But here in Europe, what leverage do European states have to pressure Israel to do more? Because we had the French president a couple of weeks ago who's saying, listen, France, for instance, for its part, cannot convince Israel. It's Washington that can do it. He's passing the buck to Donald Trump.
I mean, look, European pressure on Israel, frankly, in my judgment, is a thought experiment. The EU is not going to act, it seems to me, to somehow review or undermine the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Remember, the EU is Israel's second largest trading partner. As far as the big three, France, Germany, and Britain, those are the states I think that the Israelis care about. I think you've seen a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk. Even in the case of Britain last fall, I think they suspended 39 of the export licenses with respect to the sale of military equipment, but there are over 350 that remain. I don't think, and the Germans for sure, given their history and the way they demonstrated, understandably, a very pro-Israeli policy, I don't think are going to break openly with the Netanyahu government. So I have little faith 18 months on that either Europe or the Arab world, frankly, has the capacity or the incentive to pressure Mr. Netanyahu. And let's be clear about something. This is not a conflict between Israel and Egypt. This is not an agreement between France and the Israelis. This is a conflict between an established state which pursues policies, the occupation of the West Bank, targeted killing, settlements, closures, land confiscation. All of that is true. But it's facing off against an organization that on October 7th, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation, frankly, had October 7th not occurred. And as far as the United States is concerned, Hamas is still regarded not as a partner, but according to law, by statute, a foreign terrorist organization, which has willfully taken hostages and murdered them. So it's a complicated business here. I guess my final thought to you would be this. What you need are leaders on the American side, in Europe, and clearly among Palestinians and the Israelis to rise above what we've seen over the course of the last 18 months. And frankly, it is the absence of leadership. There are no Sadats, There are no Begins, there are no Rabins, there are no King Husseins, there are no Mandelas, there's no de Klerks. Leadership is critically important to getting anywhere in this conflict, and we don't have it. And that, to me, is the greatest tragedy of all, because I don't see these leaders appearing on the horizon.
What are you hearing about a potential ceasefire? Because 2 days ago, there was a whole lot of confusion after Hamas said it accepted a proposal, but it turns out it was a deal that proposed by Bishara Bahbah. The other U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff, proposed a deal to Israel, so it wasn't the same deal that Hamas said yes to. Where are we now? What are you hearing? And what leverage would America have to get Israel to accept a deal, given that a majority of Israel wants this war to stop, wants their hostages home?
Yeah, I mean, all of that's true. Look, I think governing is about choosing. I think the Trump administration now has 3 ongoing negotiations, one between Russia and Ukraine, going nowhere, one between Israel and Hamas, challenged to say the least, and one between the U.S. and Iran. Ukraine and Russia clearly is the biggest play of all. But in the Middle East, it would be my view that the Trump administration has prioritized an agreement with Iran. And I think that probably means that the Trump administration is not prepared now to confront Mr. Netanyahu, both on the issue of an Israeli-Hamas deal in Gaza and on a nuclear agreement between the U.S. and Iran. And I think the administration appears to have set a priority here. Up until now, the Trump administration has largely left it to the Israelis to determine both the tactics and the strategies. We know frustration is rising. And there is a possibility still, even today, of a limited exchange of hostages for a 60-day ceasefire. But I see no way right now, absolutely no way, that Washington is going to be able to summon up the kind of pressure both to get the Israelis at least to back off of any plan to strike Iran on one hand, and on the other, to conclude an end to the war agreement in Gaza. There's a better chance, it seems to me, in the next 4 weeks of a U.S.-Iranian deal on the nuclear issue, and even that is going to be a very difficult lift.
That's definitely going to ruffle feathers over in Israel. Just final question to you. In a couple of weeks' time, we have Saudi Arabia and France who will be co-hosting the International Conference for the Peaceful Settlement of the Palestinian Question and the implementation of a two-state solution. There are rumors that Paris may recognize a Palestinian state like Spain, like Ireland have done in the last year or so. Does that political traction from Western states apply more pressure on Israel, considering most states in the world, 146 I checked, already recognize Palestine?
Look, I think the Palestinians will be happy. I think France will be happy that it's basically acted in a way, because clearly the French would like to do more, I think, than they are doing. But in terms of altering the perceptions of either, in my judgment, the two major players here, the current government of Israel and the Trump administration, I doubt whether unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood is going to move the Israelis, in fact, more likely to move them backward, the government backward rather than forward.
Aaron David Miller, while I have you here, we're getting news coming in that Benjamin Netanyahu says that Hamas Gaza chief Mohammed Sinwar has been eliminated. This is what Israeli media has been reporting. What does that mean to you in terms of who makes a decision on behalf of Hamas now?
Well, I mean, since Yahya Sinwar's death last year, it's unclear. Mohammed Sinwar, the brother, and there's another brother as well. There are a couple brigade commanders in northern Gaza that are influential. Again, I think the Israelis have eliminated most of the senior leadership and left it largely to the external leadership in order to do most of the negotiating, taking their cues presumably from those insiders. Frankly, whether Mohammed Sinwar is alive or dead isn't going to change the calculus and the trajectory that we're on in terms of the Israeli-Hamas conflict in Gaza.
Aaron David Miller, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thanks so much for having me.